Okay, we did an essay for Blake 2.0 on Blake and Dylan, and the starting point of that was Tambourine Man, which I think is traditionally seen as a transition point, and it's an invitation to vision or eternity or mind-altering substances or whatever you prefer. And in this starting point, rather than afterlives, is pre-lives. And if we forget about today until tomorrow, what are we forgetting? What has memory and fate driven deep beneath the waves? And just in a very simple way, I suggest that the song has two ancestral, is haunted by two layers of ancestral memory of slavery and of blackface minstrelsy. So the singer or the addressee is branded on their feet. They're escaping on the run. The jingle jangle is slave chains. The scene of the beach is the kind of exchange of slaves on the West African coast or whatever. The slavers coming on the magic swirling ship, and we can see that. There's also on top of that is the layer of blackface minstrelsy, the ragged clown, the circus sands, the dancing spell, and if you know the history of 1830s, 1840s, the lead character in blackface was called Tambo or whatever. And so then we get the issue of is Dylan appropriating the memory of slavery? Is it blackface? Is it racist stereotype? Are there other ways of looking at this? I mean, within the American songbook reading of Dylan, everything's up for grabs. It's equal. So we have to remember that Dylan is a posh Jewish kid from Minneapolis. So if he's singing Woody Guthrie, Appalachian blues, or cowboy ballads, it's equally appropriation. It's equally fictitious. But then if we kind of, instead of thinking of tambourine as psychedelic Blake, we think of it as ancestral slavery Blake. Do the same arguments, objections apply? Is everything Blake says about Black people, slavery, white domination, blackface? It's a pretense, it's an appropriation. So last year it would have been the exhibition at the Victoria and Albert of Global Africa, Sakari Douglas Camp's sculpture based on Europe supported by Africa and America. I think one can acknowledge the sculpture is superb, but it has the effect that now the Blake print is captioned offensive and discriminatory. And one can sort of think, well, it's naked women, it's voyeuristic, the three continents replicates the slave triangle, the two women have slave bracelets, they're all linked by a tobacco leaf. And in the Nigerian sculpture, the tobacco leaf has become a kind of chain of slave chains and many things. But and also in the Stedman illustrations, there are explicit representations of slave torture. There's an idealization of the Suriname marriage with Joanna, the concubine. If one wants to get Blake's involvement with Stedman, Blake was Stedman's London agent during after the publication of the book, so indirectly profited from the earnings of a mercenary hunting down renegade black slaves, if one wants to track it. But is it, intrinsically problematic for a white artist to deal with these aspects of black history, black consciousness? The debate in Blake tends to center on a fairly small number of early texts, and we'd like to go perhaps to the later ones and think about Blake and music. And now I'll hand over to Jim and probably come back a little at the end. Is that okay?
That's cool. That's great. Okay. Great, Steve. Thank you. 1/3 of Blake's composite art is lost without trace. In biographical accounts, early and late, he's to be heard singing his own melodies. For his first favourable reviewer in 1830, his music is the nerves of Blake's work, as if it were extant. between the first song of poetical sketches and the end of the Song of Jerusalem, there are another 150, often as in the four zoas, to the sound of instruments, including 50-odd trumpets, 40 harps, 20 clarions, over a dozen flutes and pipes, and half a dozen horns, tabrets, timbrels and tabors, viols and violins, lutes and lyres, cymbals, drums, organs, a serpent, and a harpsichord. We shall never know how Blake's music sounded, despite a tantalizing shot at it, ironically, by a harpsichordist, Ruth Nurmi, who set mad song to melodies Blake might have thought of, a rather question-begging approach. Besides, the harpsichord occurs only in An Island in the Moon. In Such Holy Song, the only book on Blake's music, come here, there we go. B.H. Fairchild argues that Signor Falasella, whose musical name puns on arsehole, implies typical English disdain for Italian opera. So why not for Handel, also name-checked in An Island in the Moon, with a parody of his water music? Fairchild identifies something unmistakably contemporary about Blake's music. We agree, but find this in its affinities not with Handelian oratorio or sinfonia, but with the ancient melody of To the Muses. Almost all of Blake's musical instruments, apart from a few primarily military ones for his symphonies of war, derive from the living traditions of the folk and sacred music of the centuries. There's no cello, double bass, bassoon, oboe, hautbois, trombone, or clarinet anywhere in Blake, nor a valveless French horn, as identified by W.H. Stevenson and followed by Fairchild, if the loud horns wound round in the nuptial song are actually, as in the Job illustrations, oh, there they go, an older crooked horn. Crooked horn is another Blake's phrase for an instrument. It's in these illustrations that we hear Blake's particular sound, like Dylan's wild Mercury sound, the sound I hear in my mind. From these traditions, in seminal fusion with African-American music, as Blake writes, in continuous feedback loops for 2 more centuries, have sprung African-American spirituals, work songs, blues, minstrelsy, ragtime, jazz, bebop, soul, rock and roll, and rap, contributing in every genre to the classic decades of Anglo-American pop. We shall argue that this checkered history takes in Blake, relating the song composed by an African black in the Four Zoas and the song sung by slaves in the evening in Jerusalem to the ecstatic psalmody of the Great Awakening, and to the music of Bob Dylan, as deeply invested in minstrelsy as in spirituals. I go back to Stephen Foster, composer of O Susanna. Mr. Tambourine Man, as Steve said, is the minstrel end man. And in the lyric, you can see the references that Steve picked up. In the tradition of blackface minstrelsy, acknowledged by Dylan in titling his 2001 album after Eric Lott's classic study, Love and Theft, Mr. Tambo is the ragged clown casting a dancing spell upon circus sands. In his celebrated riposte, I think of myself more as a song and dance man. Dylan is identifying with one of the minstrel show mainstays, in his own phrase, from The Philosophy of Modern Song, the vague synecdoche of Michael Gray's title, Song and Dance Man, if I can lift this thing, it's the weight and size of a brick. The Song and Dance Man. That phrase is given its precise sense in an 1876 sketch of Peter Dwyer, a famous song and dance man in a minstrel troupe. The Song and Dance Man, the title of his 1923 play, was George M. Cohan, whose 1904 Broadway hit, The Yankee Doodle Boy, was Dylan's opener at Willie Nelson's 4th of July picnic in 2009. Acclaimed as America's Merry Minstrel Man in 1942, Cohan has his own bronze statue in Times Square, yet to be rolled into the Hudson. Judgmental, perhaps, but what about Dylan's own remark, again in Philosophy of Modern Song, that this context explains but does not excuse the stars of a film slapping on the blackface? In Masked and Anonymous, the image on the screen, a wonderful image on the screen, Al Jolson lookalike. Jack Fate is up from 2003. Jack Fate, the Dylan character, is also haunted by the ghost of a performer murdered for protesting on stage against his father's regime. Rather than Nat Turner or Uncle Gabriel, leaders of slave revolts, Dylan's conscience, urging resistance, takes the astonishing form of a minstrel in blackface. In 2022, in Amsterdam, to whoops and cheers, Dylan sang Watching the River Flow. After an instrumental segue, 30 seconds of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, followed by a minute of O Susanna, doubling down on his lifelong, unrepentant love of the whole range of Americana. He makes an implicit but breathtaking assertion of parity between the pinnacle of the Western European classical tradition and the racist nadir of American pop. And in case anyone missed the point, on July the 3rd this year, in the last months of his Rough and Rowdy Ways world tour, he covered Roll Over Beethoven itself. Like Dixie, performed by Dylan in Masked and Anonymous, the song composed by an African black in Night the Ninth is an expression of longing for my sweet native home. There it is. The song composed by an African black. Then all the slaves from every earth in the wide universe sing a new song, drowning confusion in its happy notes, while the flail of Urizen sounded loud in the winnowing wind of Tharmas. So loud, so clear in the wide heavens. And the song that they sung was this, composed by an African black from the little earth of Sotha. Aha, aha, how came I here in my sweet native land? How came I here? Methinks I am as I was in my youth, when in my father's house I sat and heard his cheering voice. Methinks I see his flocks and herds and feel my limbs renewed. And lo, my brethren in their tents and their little ones around them. Composed by Yankee Daniel Decatur Emmett, first performed in a minstrel show in 1859, Dixie became the anthem of the Confederacy. But Lincoln's favorite song was, in his own word, captured by the Union. For all its Pan-American appeal, however, the expression in faux dialect of longing by a slave for his sweet native home on the plantation begs the obvious questions of how he could ever have left it, except by sale to another master, and why on earth he would miss it if he should. As David Yaff points out, there's nothing overtly racist in the lyrics. No, perhaps not once detoxified of blackface spelling and grammar, when the twisted narrative also straightens out into simple nostalgia on the part of anyone but a slave. I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times dar are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Contrast Blake's startlingly respectful credit in the precise terminology of musical authorship, composed by an African black. Thomas Jefferson finds his slaves capable of imagining a small catch on the banjo, but gifted as they are, composition is beyond them. Born in 1792, the first recognized African-American composer, Frank Johnson, belongs to a later age. As befits this apocalyptic occasion, the literal source of the song that they sung, even to the archaic use of participle for preterite, is in Revelation, and they sung a new song with the same insistence on universal redemption. Blake's invocation of cosmic as well as legal universality from every earth in the wide universe is intensified by Dylan in the whole wide universe of Chimes of Freedom, a title lifted perhaps from Chimes of Freedom and Union, a collection of poems for the times, edited by 3 abolitionists in 1861. In Revelation, the one worthy to open the book is not a mighty angel, but a lamb. By a similar paradox, this new song, so loud as to drown the redounding machinery of the harvest, consists of a gentle psalm of innocence renewed, such as Psalm 96. O sing unto the Lord a new song. Let the field be joyful and all therein. The native land of the slaves is a pastoral paradise, but also their African homeland, to which many believed they would return in death. Certainly, Blake's slaves represent every kind of enchained soul, the miserable bound captives of imperial war, of the Industrial Revolution, of cruel religion, and of the mind-forged manacles of the countless confused, accused, misused, strung out ones and worse, and every hung-up person in the whole wide universe, as well as American slaves. Yet the explicit context is clearly of the transportation and the new song of an African black. For Donald Alt, the song begins almost ludicrously with aha, aha, but though a sole usage, Blake is citing psalms, in which those who say to me, aha, aha, are invariably enemies, a subtle implication of initial alarm. David Erdman suggests a source in Chanson de Madicas by Le Chevalier de Paulny, an exotic romance such as Oronuku or Inkle and Yariko, but we could find only the flimsiest of links. In fact, almost every word, even methinks, is biblical, mostly from the pastoral books of Psalms and Genesis, as in the last line. And you can see there that you could assemble Blake's line in kit form from Genesis and Psalms, or from the King James Bible. This song is in harmony with the line in Jerusalem. This is the song of the Lamb, sung by slaves in the evening time. In Blake's remix of the Song of the Lamb in Revelation, the lyrics are attributed to the divine vision, a shepherd, but the performers must surely be plantation slaves who sing while they slave, as on Maggie's farm, but also uniquely when their day's work is done. Losses laborers in Milton might play on instruments to ameliorate the sorrows of slavery, but neither the industrial wage slave in the mills sold for scanty hire in Jerusalem, nor any of the other protean shapes enslaved humanity put on, would have the heart to foregather for communal singing to ameliorate their own, whilst the Jewish slaves in Babylonian exile had hung up their harps. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? The answer to this question by plantation slaves is the history of American music. The implication in The Little Black Boy that to be an African black is to be bereaved of light is beautifully refuted in these later songs. But what kind of song are we hearing? Take thou this hammer, says Lost to his spectre, as in the work song, take this hammer, huh, a chain gang song recorded by Leadbelly, covered by Lonnie Donegan in 1959, and in 2023 on Moving On Skiffle by Van Morrison. A Blakean Spiritual, however, would be much nearer the mark. Famously, Samuel Davis, a Presbyterian evangelist and the benign owner of 2 slaves, you may ask my own Negroes whether I treat them kindly or no, wrote to John Wesley in 1755 that the Negroes had the nicest ear for music, took ecstatic delight in psalmody, and were exceedingly delighted with Watts's songs. The full title of Watts's 1707 collection, a literal quotation from St. Paul, is Hymns and Spiritual Songs. Following his revolutionary intervention in Protestant worship, where only metrical variations of psalms had been sung, as Martha England shows, he established almost a new monopoly throughout colonial America. Lydia Parrish suppressed what she considered an indiscriminate term, but was right on the money in Slave Songs of the Georgia Sea Islands in 1942. In all likelihood, the name spiritual struck the fancy of the Negroes, who then applied it to songs of their own composition. For the term Negro spirituals is not a subset of an existing genre of Christian, let alone white spirituals, as alleged by racist musicologists and implied by the OED definition, a spiritual or sacred song, a hymn. This ignores the Negro component of its first citation, dated 1870, with its internal evidence of much earlier use. I had for many years heard of this class of songs under the name of Negro spirituals. Colonel T.W. Higginson, one of the Secret Six who funded John Brown's raid and befriended Emily Dickinson, and commanded a regiment of freed slaves whose songs he noted down, contributing to the first anthology, Slave Songs of the United States, in 1867. One of the editors, W.F. Allen, spells the word spiritual, S-P-E-R-I-C-H-E-L, to signal the neologism, the slight but crucial change from adjective to noun. Higginson's phrase, Negro Spirituals, thus consists of a respectful addition to the name originated by African Americans for their own compositions. One sung in secret in the Civil War had a particular fascination for Higginson. No More Auction Block for Me was covered by Dylan at the Gaslight Cafe in 1962. According to the Library of Congress, spirituals proliferated in the last few decades of the 18th century, allowing for several decades of evolution during Blake's own lifetime. In The Story of Jazz, 1956, Marshall Winslow Stearns traces the custom of lining out by the priest, which lent itself so easily to the West African call and response pattern, back to a recommendation in 1644 by the Westminster Assembly because the congregation couldn't read, and forward to the Great Awakening. During a recent revival, this archaic practice has been renamed the West Gallery style, after a nostalgic remark in the Laodicean by Thomas Hardy. In Stearns' example, a hymn by Charles Wesley, he comes, the judge severe, acquires an improvised refrain, roll, Jordan, roll. Yet this is one moment only in a complex feedback loop, since the refrain had been plundered from the spiritual, itself a variation on a line, while Jordan rolled between, from another beloved Anglican hymn, There is a Land of Pure Delight by Isaac Watts. It all hinges on the magic word roll. In plate 56, Loss is lining out a West Gallery hymning chorus. Thus he chaunted his song. The daughters of Albion reply with a thesaurus of synonyms: response, re-echo, and chant, revoice. Our argument is crystallized in a single word from the nuptial song in the Four Zoas, which springs from and leads back into the world of Georgian psalmody. The nuptial song, there it is on the screen. The nuptial song arose from all the thousand spirits. We're looking at the word responsing in the second to the last line. The word responsing has been overlooked by most Blake scholars, no annotation by Stevenson, but also by the OED, which features neither response as a verb nor responsing in its own right. Howard Nelson Hilton's bold assertion that Blake here coins a neologism is disputed by Fairchild. It is, and was in Blake's time, a musical term for the second voice's answer to the first in a fugue, or for a church choir's responses to the priest. Yet Fairchild elides Blake's precise word, a rarity if not quite a neologism. There are 4 earlier occurrences, 3 from one anonymous pen in text published in Dublin in 7 consecutive years, 1774 to 76, ridiculing the ostentatious kneeling, bowing, responsing, etc. in established pulpits. The 4th, however, in a defense of public theatre by Congressman John Gardner in the House of Representatives in 1792, drawing on the work of Bishop Louth, leads straight back to Blake. Here we have the exhibition of the ancient drama, the men singing and the women responsing in a semi-chorus. Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. Louth cites the same text, I think, the Song of Moses in Exodus, to illustrate biblical parallelism and call and response, an argument epitomized by his frequent interpolation of responsive and alternate, words which occur nowhere in King James, into his own translations, particularly of the Psalms. Louth never uses the exact word responsing, but in an 1837 study of Isaiah, Thomas Milner cites Louth's translation, then interprets his text in precisely Louthian terms as a specimen of alternate singing. The seraphim divided into 2 choirs, the one responsing to the other. 2 uses of the word responsing, both dated from 1818, when Blake was still engraving Jerusalem, relate specifically to Methodist Georgian psalmody. One occurs in a report on the religious revival in Hay Bay, Ontario, where hosannas have replaced the drunkard's song and rude companies are now responsing with shouts of praise to God. In a usage closer to Blake's, in an account of Methodist evangelism in Haiti, the ecstasy of the sable souls, raising hopes of their release from slavery, if only the slavery of sin, is juxtaposed with the singing and responsing of the congregation of Europeans, as if poised to reenact their historic fusion. In 1985, on A Sense of Wonder, a composite of America and the Four Zoas entitled Let the Slave, Incorporating the Price of Experience, was recorded by Van Morrison, the best white black voice, and like Bob Dylan, a living epitome of this fusion, paying his dues to Blake.
Run out into the field, let him look up into the heavens and laugh in the brighter. Let the enchained soul shut up in darkness and in sighing, whose face has never seen a smile in 30 weary years. Rise and look out, his chains are loose, his dungeon doors are open, and let it wipe, and children return from the oppressor's sword. They look behind at every step.
To go back to critical race theory, two axioms are that whiteness is invisible and that race overrides class. So if we think about white Blake, it becomes difficult. We've got English Blake with Yeats, we've even got Irish Blake, but the idea that Blake's ethnicity therefore blanks out other possible experiences is fairly rare. So a recent book by Joey Kim adopts this and gets into a slight tangle about it, that the romantic lyric privileges whiteness. It claims universality, but is inherently oppressive, and says Blake is outside that on the grounds that he's plebeian, that he's oppositional. I mean, against that, if you look at radicals in the early 19th century, most of them are pro-slavery. So kind of, particularly Cobbett, Carlyle, Humphreys, the radical press, black slaves have it easy compared to white men. Again, on afterlives, with Blake, the settings begin 1863, but we can reconstruct what Blake heard. And the thing which is usually ignored, repressed, or embarrassed is the Methodist hymn, that he is deeply steeped in the Great Awakening in Wesley and Whitefield, which is seen as something he's got to get out of because of Thompson, the idea Methodism prevented revolution or whatever. But again, with black music, the Frank Johnson, the first composed song, 1818, Cotelons, black records of black music go back 100 years before that. It's not impossible that Blake would have encountered some spirituals via Methodist, abolitionist circles. He certainly comes from common traditions. So instead of thinking of Blakean influence on contemporary popular music as being psychedelic, visionary, we can perhaps go back to the Blakean spiritual that goes through slavery. So what is the price of experience? It is bought for a song. The song is the spiritual. And I'll stop there because we're overrunning.